Thank you all for coming. You were forced to. Anyway, I think I'm going to go quite quickly, not too quickly, but quick to make sure we cover all of this material. The first topic I was looking at was reviving wisdom in the monastic school. And you have readings from Cardinal John Henry Newman here. I'm going to go through this a little quicker. Really what he's trying to do in those readings and the idea of a university is he's trying to understand the need for theology at his particular time in the monastic school. And the interesting fact is that now people are looking at Newman again because we're having that same question. It's this question of why do you need the discipline of theology if you're just looking to have a job? Or become a master in another area. And he says this, he says, religious truth is not only a portion, but a condition of general knowledge. To blot it out is nothing short of unraveling the web of university teaching. And more importantly, he says, perfection of the intellect, the clear, calm, accurate vision and comprehension of all things, that is what the aim of a higher education is meant to be. So this well-rounded education. But we've always struggled with understanding what that means when it comes to spirituality. So I'm going to offer a possible solution. Right now we live in a world of information. Information, 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 information. But it's very rare that we have any wisdom in there. And as information becomes ubiquitous, we need to really look at the two forms of knowledge, information and wisdom, two very separate ones. Information is what we normally think of when we think of studies at a university. It would be seen as kind of the cataphatic, the understanding, the affirmation, the naming of things. And much more importantly also, this building up of lines of thinking. You could think of them as chains. First you learn algebra, and then geometry, and then calculus. So this building up of discipline. It's a consuming process. We consume the information. But we don't have anything on the other side. We don't have wisdom, which is the apophatic side, the negation, the listening, the accepting, the breaking down of those lines of thinking, and the digesting of them. If we're kind of locked into one way of thinking, then we don't necessarily actually see the creativity and the fullness of things. I'm not a chemist, but apparently I've been told by my colleagues that this is glucose, and there are actually many processes until it becomes, at the other end, something useful. So understanding, just like chemistry, that we might be able to receive information, but we need to kind of break it down, let it go, and then recombine it in order to actually have something useful. So thinking about knowledge as information and wisdom. Labor, study, prayer. This is the basic concept of a monastic school. And I'm going to offer for you a little concept I have about how this has affected higher ed currently and how we can kind of return to this model. So currently under study, we have the lecture, we have the reading, and then we have clinical or technical training. That's the general process, and each of these kind of build on each other. First you have a lecture, then you have continued readings, and then you're ready for a lab. Labor is very interesting, and I'm speaking also from a North American perspective, particularly a state's perspective about how we organize this. But when it comes to labor, what we've decided to do is we have our students work either in a menial service industry job. We have them work with us. We have 2 student workers who work with our program at the John Main Center. They do a work-study job, or they get an internship. All of these have a very low, limited amount of potential for growth. It is a job, they get a little bit of money from it, but it isn't quite something that they actually bear fruit from often. And finally, very interestingly, in prayer, we've replaced this with extracurriculars. That's where we put all of those. So it's not, you find community not through prayer, you find community through sports, Greek life, clubs, things of that nature. And so that's what we basically organized the structure to be when it comes to labor, study, and prayer, is this type of system. It's a horrible system. It doesn't work. I'm going to offer a potential revisioning of that. Study. Instead of the lecture, let's start talking about talks and seminars. We'll get into the lecture in a little bit. Yes?
Sorry, Tim, what's Greek life?
That's a good question. This is why I said it's from an American perspective. These are fraternities and sororities. So now they tend to be drinking communities more than anything, to be frank. But it's a place to find a club, an organization of people that have a common vision. So talks and seminars are going to replace the lecture. I'll speak about that in a few moments. Reading. Reading is not only going to be book-based reading. When we think about tablets and some of the things that are coming out now, I wouldn't necessarily call that reading because it's interactive. Games are part of it, but there's also video and other things of that nature. But outside of the talks or seminars, they will be engaging with some form of reading and other media. And finally, clinical and technical training will remain. Labor. This is already beginning to happen, by the way, in the United States. First thing is service learning. I'm sure many of you haven't come across service learning. It was actually my first higher ed job. I was a service learning coordinator for the University of Wisconsin system. And service learning is this concept where instead of thinking about the university, instead of thinking about the university as an ivory tower, we begin to think about it as a place where we can match town-gown relationships. So my job was I would go around to the community, political leaders in the community, nonprofits, try and understand exactly what the needs of the community were. Then I would go back to faculty. I would see what our courses were, and I would try to pair the two of them together so that we could come up with projects that were for academic credit, but that actually were making an effect in the community. Out of that, just to give you two examples, we had an art course, and a bunch of the students created a mural in a kind of decrepit part of town to make it nicer as their final project. Another example, in a course for teachers, they had a bunch of the teachers who were teaching math at a Boys and Girls Club after school. So we begin to think about it as a place where our students are learning by providing a service to the community. That is part of the monastic model of labor. The monasteries were always engines of growth within their city, what became a city, for the economy, whether it be through food, the marketplace, or eventually banking. The monasteries were part of that, growing the cities, growing the economy, helping the people. So service learning is the first of those. The second two are distinguished. They're different, and I'll go through that difference. But thinking about incubators and startups, already our students are shifting their energy from here to here. Our students are now coming to university to do some level of training, but they're really thinking in their social life, who am I going to meet who's my business partner? Who am I going to meet who I can start a business with after we graduate? It's very intriguing, but it is a better model. I think the difference between these two, by the way, incubator and startup, an incubator is the concept where you come up with a very broad idea. I'll give you a really quick example. LinkedIn. The concept about LinkedIn was that they said, I'd like to get a better picture of the economy. I'd really like to understand what jobs are actually growing, what economy, what industries, what places these are happening. So how do we do that? They got a bunch of people together from different disciplines and they created LinkedIn. They're only now, at 500 million members or whatever they have, actually beginning to see some understanding of where the jobs are, what's developing, what's not. But it kind of came from a very broad perspective. So an incubator is you come up with a broad perspective, you bring in a bunch of people who have different backgrounds, and they come up with a startup. The startup is where it's a business, a small business, that has a very concrete idea, a vision, and they just start up, really. They go out there, they start to try and see if that small business is a model that works. If universities began to think in a way that we were providing some amount of money to help students create incubators, startups, maybe even buying some level of equity in those, Gatorade came out of the University of Florida. If they actually provided money to help them start it, then that university would be in a better place. But it's also helping people actually get out there and have a job, which this system is not very effective in doing when it comes to young adults. The final stage is that we free up this whole other element of community to actually focus on prayer, ways to actually engage with their environment, to engage with art, with photography that we were speaking about with Thomas Merton, and then most importantly, for us at least in this community here, with meditation. Students are getting more and more interested in our center and less interested in the sports and clubs and things of that nature. They're finding all of that energy is good to be placed here, and then they need that apophatic element over there. So this is what I'm offering as a new model for the university. So the shifting landscape. 3 purposes of higher education in the States, generally speaking. Publishing, access to publishing for scholars, access to libraries, access to teachers. Oh look, here's our friend over here, the internet. It can now start to provide all 3 of these. At our library, for instance, students go there with their computers to sit and work from their computer. They never even visit to get a book. They get all of their stuff off online. They do like to go to the place of the library, but they tend to get it from online. Access to publishing, this is where scholars used to have to, in order to publish, they had to be at a university. It's not the case anymore. And access to teachers. Through video technology, we're actually being able to share teachers teaching via the internet. So this is the old model, which doesn't really quite make sense right now. And people are beginning to understand that. So the decline of the lecture, there's an irony that I'm giving a lecture as I say this. This is one of my favorite pictures. It was taken about 8 years ago from a professor at Stanford. And if you look, they all have computers in front of them. And since it's from Stanford, they're good Apple customers. They tend to all be Apple computers. But if you look closely, and you might not be able to tell as well on your screens, but if you look closely, you can actually tell that there are very few actually looking up at the lecturer. Most of them are either speaking to the person next to them or looking at their computer. And we can even tell in this lecture room right now how uncomfortable, how outdated this model has become. It's a Victorian model. And right now it's being disrupted, and the reason is it was built for efficiency. One person can communicate information to about 500. 1 to 500 was a big number for them. We can now do that 1 to 5 billion. It's not very efficient, and much more important, what we've learned is it's not effective. They tend to last too long, not be personal. The facilities tend to, as we're even having trouble right now, be slow to adapt to the changing technology. And finally, the real learning tends to happen individually with the tutor or in seminars among their peers. So in place of the lecture, we're putting the talk. That's an image of a TED Talk. The talk has allowed visual media, is basically reviving the more natural oral tradition. So we can be much more natural about communicating things by speaking. The web is much more efficient and effective in delivering content. Video, text, tweets tend to be short and to the point. We've learned this over the last 5 years. And I'm going to break this rule today. I hope you will stay with me. But they tend to only be 20 to 30 minutes. And as meditators, we can understand that's a very good number. But that is the maximum. After 30 minutes, people just stop listening if it's online. It tends to be very short, to the point, focused on what needs to be discussed. And as I said, the environment is very simple. It tends to be one person, maybe a screen behind them, and that can adapt as the technology adapts. So it refocuses the conversation away from the lecturer, who has all of the power, away from me, and back to you. I talk about an idea that I would like to have as a conversation, and then the students go back and they have peer-to-peer learning by going into small seminar groups where they can actually go through that data. Two schools I'm going to talk about. These are two schools which are popping up in the last 2 years in the Bay Area. The first one is known as Minerva. It was started as the Minerva Project. The Minerva Project was set up by the founder of Snapfish, which was a kind of picture app. It wasn't even an app, it was just an online thing. And in the tech community, this is an important thing. You'll remember that the tech community is changing a lot of the way we do business in the world. And they really dislike education, particularly higher education. Most of them have dropped out. They never saw what, it's not communicating the right things, it's not teaching them the right things, and this is their new experiment that they're interested in. And so they're beginning to get involved in this. Anyway, Minerva Project started in the Bay Area, and what was just kind of a concept gained traction when they made a partnership with the Claremont Schools, which is another school in liberal arts schools in California. This gave them the ability to actually give degrees. Out of that, the dean of, I believe it was Arts and Sciences at Harvard, left and came over here to Minerva. He said, this is the future. He had a very cushy job at Harvard. He was done with it. He said, we got to start building this. So what is Minerva? They call it a global classroom. All of the classes are virtual. They have a particular kind of system where you do lectures online, and then it's small seminars of 10 to 12 students who all kind of come together online. There's no campus. All of this investment that's currently happening right now in campuses, no campus whatsoever. No owned facilities whatsoever. They rent facilities across the world, small, very monastic type facilities, just apartment complexes, where they bring together 100 to 120 students to live in community, and they can define their own student life. There's some amount of guidance, but generally it's up to them to determine what their environment is. They've brought students who tend to be kind of self-starters. Some of them have started startups. Some of them have done many other interesting things before they even came to the university. But they come thinking, I'm coming to learn through engagement with these other people, but the real learning is going to happen when I get to meet these other people that we're going to possibly make some businesses with and find out things. They have locations that they're just setting up right now. They just started last year in San Francisco. They then, I think, go to Sao Paulo. Then they go to Johannesburg. And this is how the cohort goes each semester. And they rotate through each of these different places. So in the process, they're actually becoming enculturated also in a global environment. They're studying, but they're living together and understanding the cultures of the world. It's a very intriguing model. Another intriguing part about it is there are no disciplines, none at all. They just call them the 4 cornerstones. And they're all, he was the president, or the person who's taken over at Minerva now, he was a neuroscientist. He is a neuroscientist. And he said that what we really need to do is think outside of the discipline and think about ways, very similar to what Cardinal Newman was saying, ways to train people to understand how to deal with the complexity of issues that will be coming in the future. We don't know what the jobs are going to be in 10, 15, 20 years. We don't really understand the challenges that are going to happen. What we need to train them is a way to think. And so he came up with these 4. They're currently hiring lecturers under a development faculty, a very small group who's kind of determining what the different courses will be, and then a larger group of lecturers who will meet these demands. Another school, 1440 Multiversity is what they're calling it. It's being set up right now. I think they're going to start, they're talking about in the fall in Santa Cruz. 1440 Foundation was set up by the founders of the Juniper Networks, and they had a foundation that was giving money to different meditation programs across universities. We were going to go for some of their money. They started to realize there was something here, why don't we just do it ourselves? So they bought up a facility, an old university, smaller university that had gone under, and they're turning it into kind of a retreat university. The concept is the mission to learning community to connect to your best self. The focus is on continuing education, a whole person education. They have yoga, they have wellness, and then they put in professional development. Think of it as like a spa for your mind. Their audience that they're going after is working professionals. A lot of young adults from the San Francisco area are very excited about this idea. They can take a weekend, they can take a few weeks, go to this university, kind of understand themselves a little bit better, and then go back to work. They're looking at retirees, and then they're looking at gap year. It's a new idea with university. Not exactly sure where this one's going, but it's this concept that the university is a place where you can kind of check in and check out. It used to be you would go to university for a period of 4 to 8 or more years, and then you would never go back. This is the concept that you will go on a rotating basis to keep growing. I could have continued down that line, and that's originally where I was going, but given our conversation this week, I really wanted to go into something else. And that is a generational understanding, since I feel like I should say that from my perspective here. So the first thing is I wanted to treat this spiritual but not religious. It's really a vote of no confidence to the church. It's saying that this type of church on the left is going to continue to empty its pews. It is not something we identify with. However, the church that we find in nature, the church that we find in smaller communities, and the church we find personally in solitude, is a church that we do identify with. We don't have a name for that. We say this is religion on the left and this is spiritual on the right. And the church really hasn't said, no, these are just, terminology. And so that's why we get spiritual but not religious. We're not using the right structure, we're not using the right words, and from many young adults' perspective, we're not really living the message. If you look at the person on the right, that feels a lot more Christian to me than the person on the left if you look at the gospel. That's how young people think. So we need to really engage that. This is another concept of kind of a generalized conversation we're having. If you look at the political structure, which I'll kind of throw on the top, we think about this as kind of a progressive line from family to tribe to people to nation state, eventually long in the future, hopefully moving towards some kind of one human family. We'll keep falling back and forth, but the progression is to constantly move things towards seeing ourselves as one human family. And I think young people also think about this when it comes to religion. They see this as there were personal gods, there were tribal gods, then we got religion, and we keep trying to move towards seeing ourselves as one spiritual family. I'm Catholic, you're Buddhist, we're one spiritual family. So this is just a concept of kind of where we're thinking. And this is creating the rise of the early church model. We see parishes and church, or cathedrals, churches in general, organized hierarchy, alms and offerings, all kind of going down. And then in its place, we see small communities of prayer. We see this kind of spiritual egalitarianism, Jew and Gentile coming together. And in place of alms and offerings, we're not giving directly to the church, but we are giving. And in particular, most interestingly, we're giving through social justice business models. It's the concept that we don't want to give to an entity that is much older and we don't necessarily trust to put it in the right places. I'd rather do that myself. I'd rather create a business that I'm supporting and watch it grow and actually have an effect on people. It used to be that we could see that in the church, but young people don't see that today. They don't see their money at work, so to speak. Body, mind, soul. When I introduce, this is something, feel free to steal from me. When I introduce meditation, the big problem right now is that it's so popular, it's kind of encapsulating everything. So I have a particular way of trying to move our students towards understanding the real work of meditation. So at the front end, we have body. That's where yoga comes in. It's where the martial arts come in. It's where in the monastic tradition, we have this tradition of labor. And it's really about becoming attentive to the body. It's about kind of coming to a place where you can come to stillness. I have them do a really quick body scan, which is a psychological thing where you just kind of focus on different parts of your body, acknowledging, noticing stress and discomfort, and then moving to another place. But it's about coming to be attentive. From there, we can move to the next step, which is mindfulness. This is the step where we start to really develop consciousness. It's not just a kind of attentive noticing, it's a focus, a concentration. It's attention. So we're paying attention. That can be usually to a solitary thing, but it's paying attention to one thing and noticing that on a much more sustained basis. The reason I developed this train of thought is because I want to distinguish it particularly between this stage and the next one, which is meditation. Meditation is where we take that consciousness, that focus, that concentration, and we put it on something greater than ourselves, the other. For us as Christians, that's Christ. For others, it might be nature, but it has to be something other than yourself. It can't just be the breath. It has to be something of import to you, and you are attending. Attentive, attention, attending. And it is in attending to the other, attending to the Lord, that you get the final basis. And that's being proven right now in research. They call that the faith factor. That is even more beneficial than the first step, or the second step, rather. And we really need to start talking about that lineage. And I decided to put in this slide for two reasons. The first reason is to let you know that there is a need for this. We keep talking as a church as if this is not something that is needed among young people or wanted. And that's just a lie. The reality is that the model that is in place currently is not attractive. So a new model is taking its place. And that is what I'm calling the business of spirit. So since churches aren't meeting this demand, There is now a business for this. In the 60s and 70s, one of the first acknowledgments of the running industry was Nike. Nike came along with shoes, and the clothing industry from it that then developed was very connected to running and exercise. Lululemon, with yoga, kind of took a bunch of small little yoga things and actually made it something that was really exciting. So Lululemon, as of 2013, was worth $1.3 billion, 1.4 almost. That is the body that we're talking about there. In 2005, David Lynch, the kind of eccentric director, created the David Lynch Foundation. His concept was to do a $1 billion campaign for meditation. It seems like he got $2 million, probably from himself. The endowment only had $2 million, and by 2010, it had, I think there are 5 employees exactly, of which he was one, 4 were part-time in him. Flash forward 5 years from that, they now get an annual income of about $10 million. They're getting it through grants, they're getting it through paying customers, and they're getting it through donations. They still have an endowment of around $3 million, but each year they're making about 10. Their staff has grown from 5 part-time to 30 full-time and part-time, and they have 4 offices: New York, in Manhattan, I believe, actually, LA, Chicago, and then their original office in Fairfield, Iowa. 2006, good friend of the community, Chad Meng-Tan, sets up SILI, Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute at Google. It's an internal benefit, just for the Google employees. It went so well, they started to offer it to other Fortune 500 companies, and now I know through different resources and friends that they're hiring a huge team of people, it seems like, to expand this to many different businesses. 2012, and by the way, on this progression, what we're seeing is this kind of body. It's about mindfulness with David Lynch. SILI is beginning to approach emotional understanding and spirituality. And then in 2012, Starbucks does their leadership lab, where they spend $35 million in 1 year to bring people together, all of their managers, for meditation, yoga, and dialogue. That program, as I understand it, was set up by Hope Lab, which was a small nonprofit set up by the Amodiar Network, which is from the founder of eBay. And he ran a small program with a bunch of corporate executives at Starbucks who loved it, who said we should roll this out to our managers, who loved it, and now they're looking at actually providing meditation in all of their stores. They say they're going to do it not only for the mindfulness benefits, but for something deeper, something spiritual. And they say that as a company, this is going to make us better. The church used to be able to provide this and also be part of this revenue to give it to other people and to build this. But because we're not, these companies are filling in the gap. So let's talk about terminology. This is lost in translation, I believe, right now. Catholic means universal, God means love, church means community. If we took one holy Catholic Apostolic Church and young people believed that it was one family for wholeness and universal love stemming from a tradition in Christian apostolic times, I can tell you my belief is that young people would say, maybe I would rather be from a tradition in Buddhist or many other religions, but in general, this is actually something I believe in. This is a good idea. They see this as one holy Roman Empire. They don't see this real definition, really. And so, these three words are really where I have begun to focus. And I think a personal mission for me and for the John Main Center has become a community of love for all. I think that's in line with what Father John Main has said. I think that is our mission. And what we provide at the university as well is, and I've spoken to our VP of Mission Ministry about this, there is a population of students that finds their place in many different ministries on campus. But there is a perhaps majority of students who do not find their place and are not being served. We try to aim to provide this for them. The result is shocking. Most of the students who come through the center are a-religious, don't want to have anything to do with religion. And yet, once they kind of come to understand this, they want to know more. They want to start to go into their tradition. And we have had, of all of our students, I mean, even this last year, we have one who is doing the Episcopal Volunteer Corps next year, another who's doing the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, another who is, works for the Muslim Student Association of America. They're re-engaging with each of their own traditions. But all of them saw themselves, when they came to the center, as not religious. And so a fascinating thing is, once we actually speak about the depth of this, then it allows individuals to find the depth of it. So I think I'll end there. I didn't want to run too long. I have two kind of conceptual questions revolving around these two quotes from Father John. And the first is, be absolutely clear about the simplicity of the way. If we want to be clear about our evangelization, let's be simple. Let's talk about it simply. And the second is, it's a little longer, so we have to understand, to begin with, that the kingdom of God is not a place, but rather an experience. Because our understanding of the nature of prayer is so often distorted by our imagination, this is not always an easy insight to hold on to, but it is vital. Our childhood education about heaven as a place we go after we die, and about prayer as telling God what we want, should we want, has enormous and enduring influence on us. But we have to awaken to the major limitations of the education designed as it was for children. So often, our spiritual maturity falls far behind our other levels of growth and development. When I had the opportunity through the community to meet Rowan Williams, I said to him that young adults, when we see an image of God of a man with a flowing beard in the clouds, they say, "What is that?" That was Santa Claus. I remember when I was younger. We need to engage them at a level that is of their level. And on top of that, we need to start thinking about our job to make the kingdom of heaven here, now. And so I think that universities, through using this monastic model I spoke about earlier, can begin to focus on making that a reality.